Uh, can I get everyone's attention, please? Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that was the quietest everyone's ever been. Fastest, I should say. Um, so we're gonna get started. Hello, everyone, and good morning. My name is Adam Johnson. I'm 18 years old, and I will be your MC for today. I work with the Create Foundation as a young consultant. A young consultant is someone with with an out-of-home care experience in the care system and wants to help improve the system for all young people by sharing their experiences and perspectives. Today we will be launching the Children's Rights Report 2014, released by the National Children's Commissioner. This report looks back at what the National Children's Commissioner has achieved in 2014 and tracks the process of how the recommendations from 2013's report have been implemented. The 2014 report takes a particular focus on the issue of self-harm and suicide, which in my opinion is more common among young people than you would think. From my personal point of view, I think that the issues come back to the fact that there is too much pain and suffering for young people in our country, and they don't know how to cope or seek help with it. It is my hope that this report will contribute to changing that. Now, before we go any further, just a little housekeeping. I'd like everyone to switch their phones to either on silent or off, please. In case of emergency, our warden will direct us to the evacuation point. The ladies' toilets are outside in the corridor to your left, and if you go further down the hallway, the males' toilets are all the way down to the left. And parts of the launch will be filmed and photographed. So if you do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please put your hand up now so that we can try to avoid you with the cameras. Everyone's good? Okay. Now that we have that, I would like to thank the venue and the guest speakers for today. Okay. Thank you very much. Let's get started. To begin the launch, I would like to ask Uncle Alan Madden to conduct a welcome to country. Alan is a Gadigal, sorry, I'm very bad with pronunciation, elder and an experienced cultural educator, and has a long history with the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council. Could you please welcome Alan?
Thank you. Once again, my name is Alan Madden, Gadigal elder. First of all, married man, 10 children, 26 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. Yes, we did have TV. We couldn't afford the bloody electricity. Minister, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge our Aboriginal elders, all elders, and pay my respects. And to all our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters, from whatever Aboriginal or island nation you may have come from, welcome to Gadigal land, Aboriginal land. And to all our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters here today, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. No matter where you've come from, whether it be across the seas, across the state or across town, once again, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. As I've mentioned many times before, was, is, and always will be Aboriginal land. Only 3 things shorter than that: coming, taxation, and going. It is an honour and a pleasure to be here today to welcome one and all to Gadigal. Gadigal is one of 29 clans of the Eora Nation. The Eora Nation is bounded by nature's own. The Hawkesbury River to the north. The mob up that way call it the Darkinjung. Nepean to the west. The mob out there call that Derribin. And the Georges River to the south, Kaimai. And in between those 3 mighty rivers is the Eora Nation. And in that nation we have 29 clans, and the clans land we're on today is Gadigal. On behalf of members of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council and of the Gadigal mob, once again, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. There's an old saying out there that I think is very appropriate for you mob here today. You fellas have heard it a million times before. They say where there's a will, there's relatives. So once again, on behalf of Land Council and of the Gadigal mob, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Uncle Alan, for that beautiful welcome to the country. Now to welcome all our guests for this evening's events as our host, someone who with extensive experience in human rights law and a passionate advocate for children, President of the Australian Human Rights Commission, Emeritus Professor Gillian Triggs.
Thank you, Adam. It's great to have you here in the commission and playing this role for us this morning. Thank you, Uncle Alan, for your very warm welcome. There he is up the back. It's always wonderful to have you here. Thank you very much indeed. May I too acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I pay my respects to your elders past and present. Can I welcome each of you to the Australian Human Rights Commission for the launch of this second Children's Rights Report. Can I also acknowledge the Honourable Scott Ryan, who's here to represent the Attorney and the Australian Government. We're really pleased to have you here at the Commission, and we hope that you enjoy your visit. Can I also acknowledge our two guest speakers, Tracy Adams, the Chief Executive Officer of Boys Town, and Professor Philip Hazel, Head of the Discipline of Psychiatry and at the Sydney Medical School. Thank you very much for being with us, and recognise my fellow commissioners. We have Mick Gooder here with us, Elizabeth Broderick, Susan Ryan, and Tim Sukpamasam. And can I also ask you, for those of you who are technologically astute, the hashtag for Adam's group is Kids Rights 14, hashtag Kids Rights 14. Is that right? Yes. Good. So please use it. We need the social media connection. It's just marvellous. Well, I will, of course, leave Megan to discuss her report, but I would like certainly to congratulate her and the team. This is the second report from Megan since her appointment, and it's really been remarkably well received in the media and by the community in the last day or so. It's been wonderful to see people understand the appointment for the first time of a National Children's Commissioner. I think it's really starting to have its impact. I think the public also appreciates evidence-based and objective work that's in this remarkable report. And I'm particularly pleased to see a child-friendly version of that report, which makes it readily available for everybody to read. One of Megan's key functions is to make a report each year to the Attorney General about children's rights, and the launch of today's report should send a very hopeful message, because it recommends clear action that should be taken to better protect the rights of children who are most vulnerable to human rights violations. A signal feature of Megan's work over the last nearly 2 years has been her absolute determination to hear the voices of children, voices that persistently emphasise the importance of safety for their families and for themselves, and protection from violence, neglect, and particularly cyberbullying. Megan's project on the incidence of self-harm and suicide by children and young people makes chilling reading. Her work also emphasises the importance of accurate research to the credibility of her findings and recommendations. As an international lawyer, and on reading her report, I remain concerned that while Australia has ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, we continue to maintain an important reservation to it, and we've not given the Convention legal status as part of Australian law. We've also not ratified the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which permits monitoring of the many places in which children are detained, including prisons, juvenile justice facilities, psychiatric units, and immigration detention facilities. Megan was a part of the team of the Commission's inquiry into children in immigration detention, and she visited Wickham Point, Blaydon, Darwin, Melbourne, and Inverbrackie, as well as Pontville, originally in Tasmania. Our report is with the attorney and is pending tabling in Parliament. We're, of course, absolutely delighted that the Minister has agreed to release some of the children from immigration detention, especially those on Christmas Island, though this does leave 170 children on Nauru and 460 in mainland detention. It's very unclear as to whether those children will be released. But I think Megan's very clear, evidence-based report provides a very firm foundation for the work that all of you and certainly the Human Rights Commission will be conducting next year. So I wish you a very happy Christmas from the Commission. Good luck with your work, and thank you all very much for being here with us to support Megan in the launch of this, her second report. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for that, Gillian, for your welcome and supporting of today's event. It is my great pleasure to now invite the Honourable Senator Scott Ryan to officially launch the Children's Right Report 2014. Senator Ryan is the Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister for Education and also has a responsibility for youth affairs. We are very pleased that you can be here with us today. Please welcome Senator Scott Ryan.
Fix it myself. My apologies, not the ideal start, but there was a reason I grew up playing rugby in Victoria rather than Aussie rules. I had all the deft of a front row forward. Thank you. Well, thank you. I'll take two. Thank you, Adam, for that kind introduction. To the President of the Australian Human Rights Commission, Professor Triggs, Ms Mitchell, Tracy from Boys Town, who I've met previously. It is my pleasure to join you here today and represent the Attorney General and the Government at the launch of the Children's Rights Report 2014. George Brandis sends his apologies that he couldn't be here today. On behalf of the Government, I would like to thank the National Children's Commissioner, Ms Megan Mitchell, for her work. The National Children's Commissioner and the National Children's Report provide a chance for young people's issues to be heard and to gain some national prominence. The Commissioner's major project for this year focused on intentional self-harm in children and young people under 18 years of age. While I haven't yet had the opportunity to read the report myself, I'm aware that it evaluates new and existing data and draws together information received from a comprehensive consultation process and actually received some media coverage yesterday. The Commissioner is to be commended for this work. It adds to our understanding of self-harm and suicide amongst our young people. The report makes for very sobering reading. It is challenging to accept that intentional self-harm is the leading cause of death amongst Australian children and young people aged 15 to 24. As the report demonstrates, this is also an issue affecting younger Australian children. The report makes recommendations regarding further research on reducing barriers to seeking help, including the perceived stigma around seeking help, fear and awareness of available support services, and self-identification of the need to seek support in the first place. The report also suggests that more research is needed into the impact of risk factors for self-harm by children, and the Government will consider these recommendations. While there is still more work to be done, successive Australian governments have been at the forefront of work to prevent intentional self-harm and suicidal behaviour over many years. Over the past 2 decades, Commonwealth governments have played a significant role in suicide prevention, particularly through the introduction of the National Youth Suicide Prevention Strategy in 1995 and the National Suicide Prevention Strategy in 2000. This 2000 strategy not only expanded the focus of suicide prevention activities across the entire lifespan, but also specifically focused on at-risk groups, including children and youth. The National Suicide Prevention Strategy focuses on promotion, prevention and early intervention. This year, the Australian Government is providing approximately $30 million under the strategy. This funds services that aim to strengthen the ability of individuals and communities to support those who are at risk of suicide, services that provide people to people at imminent risk, and assist people who have lost loved ones to suicide. The Government also funds research. Importantly, the projects funded under the strategy also provide direct support to children. I'm sure many of you will know that the Government also funds the Headspace National Youth Mental Health Foundation. It ensures a national focus on mental health and related drug and alcohol problems and funds a network of primary health centres around the country. Headspace also provides information and is an entry point to a broader range of services for our young people. The government also invests in school-based mental health promotion, prevention and early intervention initiatives such as Kids Matter for primary schools and Mind Matters for secondary schools. These programs promote positive mental health and help young people, teachers and school staff identify and support those students at risk of or experiencing mental health difficulties. Participating schools have access to support and resources for children affected by self-harm and suicidal behaviours. And additionally, the Headspace School Support Service responds to and works with schools in the event of a tragic suicide. This service has a strong focus on identifying at-risk students following an incident. It ensures students receive the support that they need. I'm also pleased to say that the government is progressing its work on its policy commitment to enhance online safety for children. For all the wonder that our connected world has created, we also know that the online environment carries with it risks, particularly in relation to bullying and particularly in relation to young people. The home was once a sanctuary for most from a world that might have had bullying or difficulties at school or in the community, yet is now a place that some of the worst bullying can happen, alone and often in private. We are working to establish a Children's E-Safety Commission to take a national leadership role in online safety for children. We are also implementing an effective complaints system backed by legislation that will quickly remove material that is harmful to a child from social media sites. A bill to give effect to these commitments has been introduced into Parliament over the last fortnight. The bill will establish the National Children's E-Safety Commissioner as an independent statutory office, which will provide a single point of contact for online safety issues for industry, Australian children and those charged with their welfare. The government welcomes the opportunity to further consider these important issues, and I thank the Commissioner for drawing them to our attention. If I could turn to the issue of human rights more generally. As a Liberal, I consider myself a proud champion of human rights. Given my perspective, you might not be surprised to hear I consider the last 2 centuries to be one of achievement, nor that I consider this achievement to be one driven by limiting the power of the state and freeing individuals from shackles imposed by others, whether that be in the name of tradition, religion, or an alleged common class interest. A few weeks ago, we celebrated a quarter century of the anniversary of the fall of Marxism-Leninism, and I thought it was a moment to pause on the collapse of the legitimacy of totalitarianism, at least in the West. So without saying they were the easy days of human rights debates, for there were a few too many admirers of totalitarianism in our own ranks, I think we can accept that the debate is now somewhat more complex. Yet sadly, I fear since then, the human rights debate has moved from one of seeking common ground with the implicit decency of the great majority to one that occasionally fails to acknowledge it. Human rights now occasionally seem a little selective, where the abrogation of some rights, such as speech and property, might be seen as entirely reasonable for certain purposes, but that the criteria for these purposes are not being made clear. I've seen some in the Australian human rights lobby over my time in Parliament propose and accept regulations on speech and what was tantamount to the effective state licensing of speech and media comment, a proposal that was unimaginable not that long ago. I have seen the work of artists rightly defended, but the freedom of journalists disregarded. It doesn't matter whether I care for Bill Henson's photos or Andre Serrano's submerged crucifix, but to some, the fact that they were more concerned with those than they were about a journalist like Andrew Bolt being dragged through the federal court for an opinion, or the prospect of anyone else being treated similarly, does bring me concern and, in my view, weakens the case for human rights. Sometimes, it seems, making a claim of human rights reflects a desire by some, not all, to close down debate or to limit particular policies from debate. The real human rights debate takes place within our democracy, not around it. If the human rights debate is seen as a vehicle for one side of politics, or indeed even one philosophical perspective, then I believe it gets weakened and it loses its political potency as much as it can lose its legitimacy. Once the accusation racist was thrown around too often as an insult or as a political pejorative in an attempt to denigrate opinions on certain issues, and I do recall debates over native title, or indeed in my own experience, ongoing debates over immigration policy. It was used as an attempt to close down debate. I think it would be a tragedy if the term human rights was similarly tarnished in that it's lost its currency because it was used inappropriately. But back to today's report. I'd like to thank again Ms. Mitchell. I'd like to thank again today Ms. Mitchell for her work, for welcoming me here, and I'm pleased on behalf of the government to launch the Children's Rights Report 2014.
Thank you to the Senator for officially launching the Children's Rights Report 2014. We hope that this report will give you some food for thought about how we can do better for Australian children out of home care. Sorry, get tongue tied. Now, to hear from someone who has devoted their career to helping children and young people, Chief Executive Officer of Boys Town, including Kids Helpline, Tracy Adams. Tracy has more than 23 years experience in supporting and standing up for young people and has learnt much about how and when they reach out for help. Please welcome to the stage, Tracy Adams.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Adam. Could I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered and thank Uncle Alan for the welcome to country this morning. I also acknowledge and thank the National Children's Commissioner, Megan Mitchell, for the opportunity to be with you today, Senator Scott Ryan, distinguished guests. Could I also acknowledge my colleague, Mr. John Dalgleish, who leads our Strategy and Research Department and was the principal writer of our submission to the Commission. I would like to thank the Commissioner for engaging with the community on the topic of intentional self-harm with or without suicidal intent in children and young people under the age of 18. It's not really the sort of subject that lends itself to conversation and to making people feel comfortable. In fact, I suspect quite the opposite. But if we are to encourage help-seeking behaviour in children and young people, then we must also be prepared to put the things that are difficult on the agenda. We must show there is no subject or issue which cannot be talked about, no subject that children and young people need to feel isolated and alone with. In today's environment, there appears to be an obvious contradiction. Young people disconnected when connectedness through new technologies has never been easier. We know that despite a variety of different services and strategies, that there are still large numbers of young people who won't or who are unable to seek help and support. They are estranged, disconnected, and all too often without hope. Social connection with another, be it parent, teacher, peer, health professional, is critical in the prevention of self-harming behaviours and suicidal thoughts and actions. We all need to be vigilant. We all need to be aware of changes in the behaviour of children and young people around us. We all need to be willing to have conversations and, importantly, be willing to listen. We also all need to be able to identify where support can be found. It is a reality that some young people are more comfortable to seek help and support through software programs than seek that same help through human contact. As one young woman told us, the only place I'd go is Google. I'd be too ashamed to ask anyone else. So why do young people feel so unable to seek help? We've identified a number of common barriers, and I'm sure that none of these will be a surprise to you. There still remains a belief that you should self-treat problems. Just get over it. There continues to be perceived ineffectiveness of formal services where young people don't believe that services know about them enough to be able to help them. Young people have expressed to us that they've had poor help-seeking experiences in the past. There are still gaps in young people's awareness of services. As we can see here, one particular comment, young people are not sure who to go to, what those services do, and how can a young person access them. There are concerns around privacy, confidentiality, and of young people being judged. And there remains a fear of intervention. In particular, barriers related to self-harm and suicide, the fear or the experience of being stigmatised, that fear then leading to a perception of self-stigmatisation, low self-esteem, ongoing isolation, and all too often further suicide attempts. the barriers around availability, accessibility, and the quality of healthcare services. Who is there at 2 o'clock in the morning? Who is there at 9 o'clock on the Sunday? This fear of intervention, hospitalisation, and negative consequences from help seeking. And of course, the ongoing issue around trust and confidentiality. So how can we overcome non-help seeking behaviours? From our experience, we have a number of recommendations that recommend that recognition be given to the importance of increasing the capacity of youth specialist providers, implementing prevention and undertaking support services, especially for those young people who are at high risk. It is important that children and young people not be considered small adults. They have different needs. Such child and youth specialist providers should have a diverse range of options available for children and young people to connect with them, and or be networked to the extent that young people can experience a seamless transition between one service provider and another. Options for connecting with young people should be consistent with the child or young person's communication preferences. Analysis from contacts made to Kids Helpline shows us that there are varying preferences. We can see here in particular the difference between children's preference, and particularly on the issue of self-injury and self-harm. Young children, male children, prefer to engage on the phone. Indigenous children prefer to engage on the phone. But young people in both metropolitan and rural and remote have a preference for using our online services. There is no question that more must be done to encourage and develop strategies which enable children and young people to seek help and support. The earlier, the better. Ideally, we want a community where through early intervention, we see young people have the confidence and capacity to see help seeking as the norm, not the exception. We are already seeing children and young people in increasing numbers contacting organisations such as Kids Helpline for assistance on issues such as self-harm and suicidal thoughts and actions. In 2013, we responded to 9,649 presentations in relation to suicidal thoughts or intent, and almost 16,000 presentations in relation to self-injury. Over the last 5 years, we have experienced a doubling of contacts in relation to these two issues. Whilst these numbers are concerning in that they relate to children and young people dealing with such serious issues, we must also acknowledge the courage and strength these and many other young people have in coming forward and seeking help. It is now up to us to show that same courage and ensure that their voices are heard, that the difficult conversations take place, that research and service delivery comes together so as to develop new strategies to meet the ever-changing needs of our children and young people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy, for sharing your insight. And one day I hope that all young people will be able to comfortably seek help when they need it. From my perspective, that's the main reason young people don't seek help, because they don't feel comfortable. Now, as well as hearing from someone like Tracy, who often receives information about issues faced by children and young people on a daily basis, it's also important to hear from someone who undertakes academic research to create better outcomes. I would now like to introduce you to Professor Philip Hazel, who among many other roles is the head of psychiatry with the Sydney University Medical School. Philip is recognised as a leading researcher in child and adolescent mental health, and I'm glad he can share some of his valuable knowledge with us today. Please help me welcome Philip.
Thank you very much, Adam. I also wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Senator, Madam President, Madam Commissioner, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. What I want to do over the next few minutes is give you a snapshot of what we know and what we need to know about self-harm and suicide in young Australians, and then conclude with a few remarks about factors that may facilitate future research in this area. So this, by definition, is going to be an extremely superficial overview, but what do we know? We know that about 1 in 10 adolescent females and about 1 in 25 adolescent males engage in self-harm in any given year. So 2 or 3 girls in every classroom, 1 boy in every classroom. Only a minority reach medical care, about 1 in 10. Therefore, only a minority receive a mental health assessment. Most of them go undetected and don't receive an assessment. The motivation for self-harm is more about managing distress than it is about communicating to others. So it's more about internal states. It's about managing distress. About half the adolescents who engage in self-harm do it only the once. Of the other half, some continue engaging in the behaviour for a while and then it tapers. And then for a small but a very important minority, the behaviour becomes relentless, becomes repetitive, and the person's engaged in a cycle that they can't get out of. Now, to use, I guess, a medical terminology for this, in many cases, the behaviour is relatively benign, but at some point along the way, in some people, it turns malignant. It becomes a malignant problem. The relationship between self-harm and death from suicide is relatively weak. That said, self-harm repeaters, particularly those whose self-harm is escalating in medical severity, are a high-risk group. So they're a high-risk group for death from suicide, but they're also a high-risk group for other very bad outcomes. Another negative outcome is irreversible medical damage, that's injury that's arisen from the acts that they've done. They're also a group that are far more likely to suffer ongoing mental illness. They're less likely to complete school. They're more likely to have relationship difficulties. They're less likely to find secure and ongoing employment. The treatments designed to prevent the recurrence of self-harm have not been very successful. However, there is some recent promising data about specialised individual psychotherapies. These interventions need to be evaluated again to see whether the findings can be replicated. The death rate for suicide among young people has been trending downward rather than upward. So that's the good news. The very bad news is that our Indigenous young people are seriously overrepresented in the death statistics for suicide. Most young people who die from suicide have a complex set of mental health, social and substance abuse problems. Most have had contact with mental health and welfare services in the year prior to their death. Now, the glass half empty view of that is that we're failing these people, the systems aren't working. Actually, I don't think that is the appropriate and correct interpretation. I think the systems are working very well, but there are still situations where we need to work better. We need to be smarter to be able to capture, recognise the kids, particularly those who are in the escalating category, the malignant version of the problem, to capture them before we have devastating outcomes. So what do we need to know? Well, I think we need to know what differentiates adolescents who engage in self-harm maybe once or twice from those who engage in it repeatedly. Is it the influence of peers? Is it the influence of the online environment? Is it something about the physical or the psychological effect that the self-harm has on the person? What factors protect against self-harm in the first place? What prevents recurrence of self-harm? What role is the online environment playing in self-harm and in suicidal behaviour? And in answering that question, we absolutely need to engage young people because they're the people who speak the language. People like me don't. What is it we should be targeting when we treat young people who self-harm? What are realistic treatment goals? How should we prepare gatekeepers, or as I prefer to call them, first responders, to assist young people who come forward with suicidality or self-harm? How can we better identify and manage young people whose self-harm is escalating in severity? And following a suicide death, how should we best support the young people directly or indirectly affected by the death? How do we bolster protective mechanisms against suicide to prevent clusters? What factors render Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders especially vulnerable to suicide and self-harm? What specific factors may be protective? Now, in terms of facilitating research, I've picked out 2 ideas that are highlighted in the report and thrown in a third one. Interesting, I'm not going to ask for money. First one, and it comes directly from the report, is more consistent use of terminology so that we talk better with each other when we are talking about these problems, so that we're looking at the same issues. We're not comparing apples with pears. Secondly, we need quality data, but also we need access to that data. There's no point in collecting great data if you can't actually use it, you can't access it effectively. And that requires cooperation between various bodies of government and between the states and the federal government. And the final one to facilitate research is competent ethics approval mechanisms. I'm not saying that ethics committees are incompetent, but we've been on a learning curve over a long time. And I know when I first started researching in this area, whenever I put in a research grant, an ethics application, I could see that there were at least 3 red lights flashing on the ethics committee desk. The first was young people. Oh, we don't want to research them. Oh, consent, it's terrible. The second one was mental health. Oh, I don't want to research that. It's too risky. And the third one was suicide, self-harm. We don't want to go there. Duty of care. It's too difficult. So those are the challenges, and I hope we find a way forward to enacting many of the recommendations that appear in the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Professor Hazel, for your time today and your many years working in this area. It is now my pleasure to invite up Megan Mitchell, the National Children's Commissioner, to tell us more about the report and its findings. Megan started her term in March 2013, and in her first year as Commissioner, she heard from more than 2,300 children and young people about the issues most important to them. Please welcome Megan Mitchell.
Good morning and welcome, and thank you. Something here. Right. Yeah, thank you, Adam. You're doing a sterling job. It's great to have you here. And I always think it's great to demonstrate how fabulous young people are and what they're capable of. I'm very proud to be launching this report today on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, where children have played and grown up for thousands of years. And I too pay my respects to elders past and present, and a special thanks to Uncle Alan Madden for the welcome to country. You're always funny. Makes me laugh every time, even though I've heard it before. It's a full house, which is fabulous. And I think this just shows the breadth and depth of community feeling about the importance of investing in children and their well-being. And I'd in particular like to thank Senator Scott Ryan for officially launching the report. Thank you, Senator. And our President, Gillian Triggs, for welcoming us to the Human Rights House. I'd also like to applaud our eminent speakers, Tracy Adams and Phil Hazel. You've been absolutely invaluable sources of information and insight to me through this whole process, so thank you very much. I'll just acknowledge the commissioners in the room. There's a few of them that have already been named, as well as many other colleagues and distinguished guests and supporters. Thank you all. As Adam said, I was appointed last year as the first National Commissioners Commissioner and for children, and a priority for me, a key priority for me, has been to promote respect for the rights of children to be heard and taken seriously, in line with Australia's obligations under the Convention of the Rights of the Child. So I did last year take the opportunity to talk to a lot of kids, around 2,300 kids all up, and their advocates on what I call the Big Banter Listening Tour. And this experience fundamentally shaped the thematic priorities for my forward work plan, which I set out in last year's report. And the words and ideas of those children that I talked to still ring in my ears and keep me focused. These themes were, and they're on the screen: the right to be heard, freedom from violence, neglect and abuse, the opportunity to thrive, engaged citizenship, and action and accountability. This report contains a range of information about my activities for the year against a number of those themes. And this is including preparing a number of submissions to the Royal Commission on Child Sexual Abuse in Institutional Settings and other relevant inquiries concerned with child rights. Participating in the Commission's development of curriculum-based resources around human rights, and also, as Gillian noted, participating in the Commission's inquiry into children in immigration detention. I've also visited a number of schools and children's services to talk to children and promote concepts and understanding of child rights. This makes sure that my immune system is consistently challenged. I also gathered, I was particularly privileged this year to work with Early Childhood Australia to develop a statement of intent on supporting young children's rights. And this will be launched early next year and will provide practical guidance to early childhood educators on implementing a child rights approach in their workplaces. And I'd like to send a special thank you to the representatives of ECA who are here today, Jane Bourne and Marie Stewart. I'm going the wrong way. I also gathered children's views about privacy, which is an interesting concept in today's world, as an input to the Australian Law Reform Commission's review of privacy laws. And here's some of their feedback. It's about secret things. They think that children should know a lot more about privacy because they don't know much about it. And there are lots of ways that you can protect people's privacies. And a lot of kids said that, though a lot of the younger kids said equated privacy with like stranger danger. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to educate kids in this space better. However, the majority of this year's report, as you know, is devoted to how the human rights of children and young people engaging in intentional self-harm could be better protected. And before I decided to look at this issue, I knew that this was a significant public health challenge in Australia. Okay, so the latest data has already been mentioned that in 2012, tragically, intentional self-harm was the leading cause of death among children and young people 15 to 24. And there were also over 10,000 hospitalisations for intentional self-harm in the 5 to 24-year-old age cohort. I knew that death and hospital statistics were just the tip of the iceberg. And as Dr. Hazel pointed out, some studies indicate that only around 10% of self-harm incidents result in hospitalisation. I knew from research and reports that certain groups of children and young people, because of their circumstances, are especially vulnerable. We've had a little bit of a discussion about Aboriginal children, but it's very important to understand that they're 5.2 times more likely to die by suicide. Some studies have shown that people and children in rural and remote areas are twice as likely to die by suicide. And a recent study by the Young and Well Cooperative Research Centre showed that of the young, sexually diverse and gender variant young people they surveyed, 33% had self-harmed and 16% had attempted to take their own lives. Research also shows that within the population of children in care, around 7% had attempted suicide. So these are just some of the very vulnerable groups of children and young people we need to know more about. From a personal perspective, From my own niece engaged in intentional self-harm for many years, first carving the word fat into her arm at just 14. And I've seen the cumulative harm that it can cause. Sam, she's now 29 and I hope out the other end, but it's gone on for a long, long time in the way that Dr. Hazel indicated. She now promotes help seeking and describes this past behaviour as a coping mechanism for self-esteem and feelings of inadequacy. The issue of death due to intentional self-harm has not been without investigation. Since 2010, there have been 2 national inquiries and several state and territory reports. But despite these, children, young people and child advocates continue to raise the issue of intentional self-harm with me. And worryingly for me, many were concerned for younger children. So for all these reasons, I decided this was an area in need of further investigation, with a particular focus on children's rights and for children under 18. I want to say a little bit about the Convention of the Rights of the Child, which Australia ratified 24 years ago. It includes a number of important rights related to intentional self-harm and preventing it. So Article 6 of that convention guarantees children the fundamental right to life, to survival and development to the maximum extent possible. The convention also guarantees children the right to protection from all forms of violence, including self-inflicted harm, under Article 19, and the right to the highest attainable standard of health under Article 24. These are basic human rights. These are fundamental human rights that every child has. The Committee on the Rights of the Child asks countries to report on child deaths due to intentional self-harm, provide disaggregated data about deaths and information on prevention measures. The committee has made reference to intentional self-harm in children and young people as a health consequence from exposure to violence and maltreatment, and has noted that counselling support should be made available to children. As National Commissioner, I must have regard to the Convention, and using the Convention and a child's rights-based approach to examine intentional self-harm can add value in 2 fundamental ways. First, it acknowledges that preventing intentional self-harm in those under 18 years of age is not only the right thing to do, but it is also legally required under international human rights law. It recognises that children and young people are rights holders and active agents who should be placed at the centre of prevention efforts. Second, a child rights approach shows that intentional self-harm disproportionately affects certain groups of children and young people, as we have seen, who are subject to discrimination, disadvantage and exclusion. The Convention's focus on equality calls the governments and its institutions to account to protect the human rights of all children in its jurisdiction. My examination included 12 expert roundtables across Australia with 154 people participating. We also held a public submission process and we received 140 written submissions from a range of organisations and individuals, including from young people, parents and carers. The Kids Helpline submission, which you've heard a little bit about, includes previously unpublished data about contacts from children and young people aged between 5 and 17 years. Over 80,000 kids contacted the Kids Helpline during 2012 and 2013. And in 11,000 plus contexts, they directly stated that self-harm or suicide was their main concern. The report contains detailed information about the Kids Helpline submission and the contacts that children made, and I sincerely thank Tracy and John Dalgleish and Kids Helpline for their invaluable support. Thank you. I was also able to access experiences of children and young people affected by intentional self-harm through partnerships with organisations, working directly with them. This was the safest, most confidential and sensitive way to hear from children and young people who might be in distress. However, a number of courageous young people and families did share their stories directly with me, with the aim of ensuring other children and families get the help they need and to prevent further harm to precious young lives. And I cannot begin to express my gratitude to these selfless and generous individuals. As part of the project, I sought original data about death and hospitalisation in order to fill some of the known data gaps in this area. I thank the National Coronial Information System, the ABS, and the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare for providing data and supporting this examination. The data released in my report provides new levels of detail about children aged 4 to 17 years who have died due to intentional self-harm, and previously this data has been unavailable. It presents a confronting picture, with on average 1 child per week dying as a result of suicide, and a further 50 to 60 hospitalised due to self-harm. According to the Kids Helpline, the key co-presenting concerns children who contacted them raised were things like emotional distress, which is anger or feeling overwhelmed, family conflict, relationship breakdown, grief, mental health issues and abuse. And other issues included, but at a slightly lower level, bullying, school pressure and body image. This is fabulous to have been able to get some of the voices of children into this report in this way. It further shows that in the 2007 to 12 period in the report, there was a 657% increase in the number of deaths between the 12 to 13-year-old age and the 14 to 15-year-old age. This spike tells me we need to get in much earlier to build resilience, identify risk factors and encourage help seeking. And this needs to be done in a way that considers what is happening at this time in children's lives in relation to brain development, hormonal and bodily changes, as well as living circumstances. You know, I was visiting Keilor Heights Primary School, it's a fabulous school, in Victoria just a week or so ago, and I was talking to a group of earnest 5 to 7-year-olds, and they told me about the mottos that they have at this school, one of which is resilience. And I asked if anybody knew what resilience meant. And the one girl, oh, yeah, I know. And she put up her hand, yes. And then she looked at me intensely and thought very hard and said, I have no idea. But then another young girl said, and she must have been 6, I reckon all of 6, said, I know. It means not crying over the small things. This school was doing the business. Data presented in the report shows that between 2008 and 2013, there were over 18,000 hospitalisations for intentional self-harm in children under 18. These are big numbers. And 82% of these hospitalisations were for intentional self-poisoning. And so the primary finding from my examination, unfortunately, is that too much continues to be unknown about children and young people who engage in this behaviour. To paraphrase the bard who said, through the character of Harry Hotspur in Henry IV, out of this nettle of danger, we must pluck the flower of safety. I'll learn by the end of it, I'll know which direction to go. To make inroads in reducing intentional self-harm in children and young people, I have recommended that a national research agenda for children and young people should be established. This agenda should involve the direct participation of children and young people and focus on, in particular, the multiple risk and protective factors central to targeting and supporting children, the effectiveness of postvention services and gatekeeper or first-to-know respondents training, the awareness level of primary caregivers about risk factors and warning signs, ways to restrict access to the means used to self-poison in particular, and ways to encourage children and young people to access appropriate help and support. Children and young people under 18 years of age, including children under 12, should be a clear focus of this research program. I've also called for the type of data released in this report to be made available every year. Without comprehensive surveillance of intentional self-harm in children and young people, prevention and early intervention strategies cannot be properly planned or evaluated. I recommend that the Australian Government and the relevant data custodians produce annual reports on death and hospitalisation due to intentional self-harm in children and young people aged 0 to 17 years. I also recommend that all jurisdictions use the standardised National Police Form to collect data about suicide and adopt standardised coronial legislation to require coroners to make a finding about intent for deaths they investigate. And finally, I call for the guidelines for the management of deliberate self-harm in young people to be reviewed and updated. I hope a review of this type will improve the level of care children and young people receive when they present in particular to emergency departments, but also other health services for intentional self-harm. Adopting the recommendations in my report would deliver regular and more detailed surveillance of intentional self-harm in children and young people and put into place a national research agenda to improving our understanding of effective intervention and prevention. I have undertaken this work to shine a light on an issue that was somewhat hidden. We do need to be very careful when we talk about it, but we cannot ignore it. We owe it to our children to do all we can to protect them and help them live safe, happy and healthy lives. Back in the day, Aristotle said that the safety and happiness of society are the objects at which all political institutions aim and to which all political institutions must be sacrificed. Children are our most precious resource, and it is a tragedy that they are taking these actions against themselves and in increasingly large numbers. As a civil society, we need to do everything in our power to understand what is happening and improve our responses and interventions. I couldn't have done this work without the help of DLA Piper and the fabulous, small but perfectly formed team here at the Commission, Susan Nicholson, Lockie Ball and Jennifer Ross, so thank you to you in particular. My sincere appreciation for all the support you have given me this year, even at my most ambitious and impractical moments. You should all be very proud of what we have achieved. Told you I'd get it. It's important in discussing and reporting this subject to promote help seeking and to provide information about where to seek help. And here's some contacts for Kids Helpline and Lifeline and also Mindframe if you're thinking about reporting in the media. Before you leave today, please have a look at the quilt, in a bit of disarray at the moment, but we'll fix it, on the wall here that features on the cover of this year's report. This was presented to me by children and young people in care who are supported by the Create Foundation. It clearly shows what vulnerable children care about: being strong, having love in their lives, being treated with respect, having someone who will look out for them when things are tough, a home, family, being able to dream big, equality. These are important messages to adults. Let's make sure we listen. Thank you again for coming today, and please stay for some lunch and conversation.
Just get Megan to stay up here. Don't worry, all of you guys will have to come back up too in a second, so you won't be alone. All right, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Megan, for your leadership as the National Children's Commissioner and for your work in this year's report. And I'd also like to thank both you and Philip for acknowledging that self-harm can become addictive and a recurring thing. I have a few friends who would be very, very happy to hear that. But now back to what I was meant to be saying, which I hope will lead to a real change in solving issues for children and young people around Australia. I'd like to thank all our guest speakers today with a small please. So I'd like you all to come up. Please, Uncle Alan Madden, Professor Gillian Triggs. Oh, he skipped out. It's all good. I would like to just invite up all the guest speakers. Senator Ryan. Yes, everyone, please. Thank you. Just to the side here. And I'm sure that our commissioners have the gifts here somewhere. So I would. Oh, they are? Oh, here. Thank you. This knows more than I do. All right. Tracy Adams. Thank you very much.
You're coming.
Yes. And now, personally from myself, I would like to thank everyone for their effort and dedication in this field. I know it doesn't always work out the way you planned, but it is your effort that young people such as myself really appreciate. And I'd hope that all the work all of you have done will one day bring about an amazing positive change, and that it eases the pain and suffering of some young people. Also, I have been asked to ask all of you to jump on Twitter and Facebook and like it, as they do. Yeah. So it's Megan M4Kids. It's like a letter M, or one word, both Twitter and Facebook. And the hashtag before was Kids Rights 14. Be good to share it around. Anyway, thank you all for coming today. And I would love it if you would join us for morning tea. Now, yeah.
That's it.
It's outside, by the way, sorry.